I want to talk about something I nearly missed. Not a big life moment, just a party. But what almost made me leave early taught me more about how my stress pattern works than most of the reading I've done. I almost left this party at the 2 hour mark, and I had a perfectly reasonable excuse. There was another party across town, people I already knew, people where a good time was basically guaranteed. And I was just sitting there, alone, with a plate of genuinely terrible pizza. Burnt base, dry cheese, music too loud, social battery somewhere around 12%, telling myself I'd done enough. Here's the thing though, that feeling, that calm, very reasonable pull to the door, that's not actually good judgment, that's just a stress pattern. And it has a name. And it doesn't feel like fear necessarily. It doesn't always feel like anxiety either. It's not always dramatic. It's more like a quiet narrowing. The room starts to feel slightly too much. The conversations you've had already feel complete. Your body does this low level sort of audit, energy levels, noise tolerance, how many people you need to say goodbye to, whether you can slip out without making it a thing. You're not running, you're just calculating the exit, calmly, reasonably, with what feels like a total self-awareness. And that's exactly what makes it so hard to catch. It doesn't feel like a pattern, it feels like wisdom. I only spotted it because 3 days earlier, I'd been sitting with my dad and my cousin Kay, going through the Quantum Buddha framework together. 3 days of going deep into their patterns, watching the moments where something lands so hard the room goes quiet. And in one of those sessions, I'd read something out loud that I'd written for the flight pattern of the report. The flight pattern always has a very good reason. It makes the motion feel like the right thing. And that's what makes it so hard to see from the inside. Kay heard that and said, "That's a bomb in my head." So I knew the line, I'd written it, I'd watched it land for someone else that I loved. And I still nearly didn't catch it myself at the party. And that's the thing about survival patterns. Knowing about them and being free of them are two completely different things. But knowing them gives you a fighting chance. When I looked at why I wanted to leave, I noticed something more specific. The flavor of relief I was imagining wasn't just rest, it was escape. Escape from not quite knowing whether the conversations I'd been having were landing, escape from the exposed feeling of having told a room of strangers about this cool thing that I was building and not knowing what they made of it. That exposure, that's the signal. When I noticed I wanted to leave right after I put myself out there, something real into that space, that's almost never tiredness. That's the pattern trying to protect me from finding out whether it landed. So I stayed. It wasn't a movie moment. It was just life doing what it does when you stop trying to manage it. I went outside to get some air, partly to clear my head, and partly to decide whether I was actually going to leave. And that's where she appeared, a girl with a dog and a smile, over from Seattle. And we ended up in one of those effortless conversations that has its own momentum. Laughter, swapping music recommendations, the kind of exchange you couldn't have engineered if you tried. And then my cousin introduced me to a guy who looked like Jason Statham and turned out to be genuinely one of the most interesting people I spoke to in months. 44 years old, doing real work on himself, talking openly about growing up inside toxic masculinity, about therapy, and the gap between who he was told to be and who he was. I told him about the Quantum Buddha framework, and he leaned straight in. We talked for the better part of an hour, interrupted only by a hen party descending on the room with the chaotic energy that just has to be witnessed, before picking it back up and going deeper. And throughout the night, a couple of strangers walked up to me and said, "Are you Quantum Buddha?" My cousin, it turned out, had already been talking about me. Not because I asked him to, but because he helped me to actually launch the podcast, and he wanted other people to know about it. None of that happens if I take the exit at the 2 hour mark. Here's what staying actually gave me, beyond just the good conversations. It gave me evidence that I can handle a room that isn't already mine. Evidence that the thing that I'm building travels, that it lands with strangers, that it holds up even if I'm not my most polished or my most energized. Evidence that the version of me sitting there with terrible pizza feeling slightly overwhelmed is somehow still someone people want to talk to. And that last one matters more than it sounds, because the flight pattern at its core is built on the belief that you need to be performing for the space to be worth staying in. That if you're not on, if you're not feeling celebrated, you might as well just cut your losses. But the Jason Statham conversation happened when I was tired. The girl with the dog found me when I stopped trying. The cousin ambassador moment happened entirely without my own involvement. The good stuff doesn't require you to be performing. It just requires you to still be there. We live in the most distracted era in human society. In the last 15 years, an entire generation slowly got addicted to their phones. And the wild thing is, we watched it happen. We were there before. We remember when boredom was just boredom. When you sit on a bus and just look out the window. When a conversation was just a conversation, not something happening alongside 3 other screens. I refused to watch shorts for the longest time because I knew exactly what they would do to my attention. And eventually, even I fell into the trap anyway. That's not weakness. That's just how well engineered it is. But the phone is just the most efficient version of something that the flight pattern has always done. Find the exit. Keep moving. Don't feel the thing underneath. The discomfort of stillness arrives and the phone removes it before the nervous system ever has to learn to sit with itself. My ancestors grew up in India, maybe not knowing where the next meal was coming from. That generation didn't have the luxury of the stress button. They had actual survival. They had built entire lives, families, communities under those conditions. The resilience wasn't just practice. It was just what Tuesday looked like. We've insulated ourselves so completely from real adversity that we've lost the baseline calibration for what hard actually is. And in the process, we've built an infinite supply of exits. Every uncomfortable moment now has a door, and that door is always just in your pocket. The question I keep coming back to is this: how much of real life have you missed out on looking at a screen? Not as an accusation, just as a genuine question. The date you were half present for, the conversation you were in but not in, the sunset photographed instead of watched, the moment you'll never get back because your thumb was moving before you even noticed. The flight pattern, at its most basic, is this. This space doesn't feel safe enough, certain enough, celebrated enough. So let's find another one that does. The problem is, the safe space is never where the good part exists. The good part is almost always just past the moment you most want to leave. Past the awkward lull, past the point where you run out of easy things to say, past the burnt pizza and the too loud music and the voice in your head running a cost-benefit analysis on staying. I've built a framework that explains why, even when your life is good, the nervous system still thinks you're under threat. And part of that work is learning to tell the difference between genuine depletion and a pattern manufacturing an exit. That night at the party, sitting with terrible pizza, I caught it just in time. Stay a little longer. You might be closer to the good part than you think. And if you recognize the flight pattern in yourself, or you're curious of which the 4 stress masks is running most of your exits, I've linked the quiz down below. It takes 4 minutes and it might just show you something you haven't been able to see from the inside. Catch you in the next video.